Hello and welcome to Why Wasn't It Better? I'm your host, Patrick Darms.
And I am your co-host, Anton Paras.
We have a return guest with us making his third appearance, so this is where he becomes a serious guest.
Yes.
Ivan Calixto, welcome back.
I'm not series regular yet, right? Like this is just still guest starring.
You're getting there.
Okay. I think you're getting there. You're now, if we're thinking about it in terms of TV credits, I think you're special guest category still, but I will add, I did want to add this to your intro, industry expert. I think that's a fair moniker.
Experts is a strong word.
Industry professional.
Industry professional, I think, is fine. Yeah. I think I need another 15 years if I'm gonna tackle on expert on.
What about industry genius?
That's too. That's even heavier than expert there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we teased it a bit in the last episode that we had you on, Ivan, but we're going over an episode today that is extra exciting because we know that you worked on the film, that you do have your contribution to the film. You know, probably won't hold back. We're going over Batman versus Superman: Dawn of Justice today.
It's a big deal. This movie was a big deal. It really was.
This movie
really quick though, Ivan. Just to, if you want to use this for a little extra motivation for yourself, if you make it to your 5th appearance on the podcast, we'll send you a gift.
Those are IMDb terms too. Like if you get 5 credits on IMDb, you finally get the chance to edit your name. And I should probably correct my IMDb stuff too, because I'm in there in a couple different ways.
Yes, you are on IMDb.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, you'll get there. We've already been talking about what else you can appear on. Waterworld, I think, was in the discussion.
That was in the discussion. If we just keep naming more films that you've worked on, that'll definitely hit 5.
If you guys want to see the stuff that I heavily worked on, let's touch reality TV. Let's go for full.
That's a very different show.
Let's go for full.
That is a different show.
Talk about different genre. I don't know if I've talked about it on the show, but Pat knows this. I'm a very big Tubi proponent, for better or worse.
For whatever reason.
The worst side of it right now is I've been trying to find, like, I love exploring Tubi because it's just, their algorithm's horrible and there's just so much content on there. Now I'm getting recommended a lot of really bad reality TV, including Gypsy Sisters and Gypsy Weddings. Whew. It's a different category. I never knew that existed.
Like actual gypsies from like Sherlock Holmes?
Well, so that same lineage, but think more white trash, like Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. I didn't know there were gypsies in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, neither did I.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. Romany gypsies. There's like I think a lady in Manhattan that does all of their wedding dresses. I've honestly watched a couple episodes because I was like, what is this? It's more Jersey Shore, less think of like gypsies from Sherlock Holmes.
This is what the listeners tuned in to hear, I'm sure.
Yeah, so of course Batman versus Superman. Dawn of Justice. But yeah, I'll find more information and send that out so that way you guys can stay informed on this subject.
Sure. I'll look forward to it. Yeah, the film that we're discussing today is Batman versus Superman: Justice of Dawn, which I feel like had they gotten that title wrong, it would have had the same impact.
Yeah. This is one of the movies that definitely didn't need any sort of like sub under that title for any.
Well, that's one thing we cannot blame on Zack Snyder because it wasn't his idea. But no, this is very exciting. I don't want to underplay this, Ivan. The fact that you actually worked on this film and contributed to it is really cool.
Yeah, I'll shed a little bit of context on that. So I spent about 3 weeks working on set, I guess, for lack of a better term, because the movie began shooting around late 2013 in, I want to say, September, maybe late August, if I recall, and that extended all the way up until around mid 2014, if memory serves. And so around May, I think, or April of 2014 is when I got involved. I had a buddy of mine that was working for Warner Brothers and had invited me over. I was in between jobs. And I went over there and basically kind of became a little bit of a gopher for a couple different projects. But Batman vs. Superman was the big thing that was dominating the lot at the moment. And I had a chance to work on previs for a couple of things that they were about to do. And yeah, it was a fun experience. I got a chance to chat with a number of different people. I got a chance to work with Pat, one of the production designers over there, who I think was responsible. I think fully. I don't know if maybe that's maybe too much of a stretch, but I think he was the guy behind the design for the Batmobile and things like the bat suit.
He got a Greek name. I know who you're talking about. I think, right?
Yeah,
Tatopoulos.
Tatopoulos. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna
That's
say
awesome.
Patotelis, but yeah.
Real quickly for our listeners, can you just quickly describe what previs is?
So previs, there's a lot of terms in the industry that kind of vary a little bit. Previs typically is the stuff that you do before you get to the actual set and start your shoot. So that can range from storyboarding. I think that's the thing that most people understand it to be. But it's also getting anything sorted out from setting your locations, getting any sort of permissions that you need to be in the particular location for a particular time, balancing out a budget, getting anything from cast ready, getting concepts to screen, which basically means getting your whatever is set up on concept art, like positioning that, pushing it towards finally getting something that's screen ready. It's essentially getting ready to shoot the movie, for lack of a better term. You'll find a lot of like umbrella terms with that. It's the same thing with like producer, where like producer will have there's producers that are heavily involved with the movie, and then there's some producers like your Steven Spielbergs of the world that kind of just like put their names onto stuff, but they're not really involved all that much. But yeah, the film industry is a bit of a
and everything in between.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, very exciting. You're on set for this, and really interesting timeline 2 years before the release of the film. So, of course, there was a lot of work done leading up to that 2016 release.
Yeah, this had an incredibly lengthy post-production.
Yes.
Which we will discuss.
Which we can see on screen.
Yeah. Well, Ivan, that's amazing. That really is.
Yeah, that was probably one of the best experiences I had, just kind of working in the industry. From like getting to work and getting to do something on an iconic lot, and just kind of helping out in any way I could.
Did you get that hat on set?
I did not get this hat on set. I got this hat from a New York Comic Con.
Okay.
Warner Brothers booth.
Okay.
But yeah, this movie, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I feel like I got a little bit of, because there's gossip and stuff that kind of spreads around. But this was a very interesting time, I think, for comic book movies in particular, but for Warner Brothers, kind of wanting to get into the fray of this big box office behemoth that Marvel was, and I think they kind of saw it as a good opportunity for them.
They tried.
Yeah. They did. They took their shot. I mean, I can't blame them for trying, but
Well, Ivan, as we continue to go through, we have our production that we go through, of course, and all of our reasons. But if there's anything that you're like, hey, like on top of that, I saw this on set, well, don't hold back, because I think that is just so exciting, and we're really excited to have you here today and talk about this film.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been nearly 2 years since Superman's colossal battle with Zod devastated the city of Metropolis. The loss of life and collateral damage left many feeling angry and helpless, including the crime-fighting billionaire Bruce Wayne. Convinced that Superman is now a threat to humanity, Batman embarks on a personal vendetta to end his reign on Earth, while the conniving Lex Luthor launches his own crusade against the Man of Steel. The film was released on March 25th, 2016 by Warner Brothers Pictures, DC Entertainment, Rat Pack Dune Entertainment, Atlas Entertainment, and Cruel and Unusual Films. Directed by Zack Snyder. Screenplay by Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer, based on characters by DC. Starring Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Jesse Eisenberg, Jeremy Irons, Gal Gadot, Lawrence Fishburne, Diane Lane, Holly Hunter, and Tao Okamoto. The budget was $263 million. That is $345 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office was $874 million. That is $1.14 billion adjusted for inflation. Ivan, I'm going to skip you for the time being in terms of the question of why you wanted to appear on this episode, because I think that's quite clear. Anton, this is our first Zack Snyder film.
Yeah, and Zack Snyder has come up in conversation, but this is a very momentous episode. But yes, you're right. First time we get a Zack Snyder film.
He's polarizing, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, our listeners have definitely seen his films. big film that I think broke him out into the industry or even into the hearts of many a young high schooler in the 2000s was, of course,
I was going to say Dawn of the Dead.
That was very, very...
Yeah. That's his first movie, right?
I think first major production, yeah.
Whether you like him or not, he is a household name by this point.
Yeah.
He is.
Especially on Netflix.
Especially on Netflix. He has a very dedicated fan base who will defend his visual style. He has a very distinct visual style. I'll give him that. He also seems to have an equal amount of critics who negatively compare him to filmmakers like Michael Bay. You know, those get brought up a lot.
But he has a very particular kind of genre that he likes to direct, right? Which is no surprise considering the subject matter today.
That is certainly where he eventually found his footing after Dawn of the Dead. You mentioned 300. That was really his first big hit, right? I think Dawn of the Dead was did well, but 300...
More of a cult classic for sure.
Yeah, 300 was a big deal when it came out. And then a couple years after that, he did the Watchmen adaptation, which did not do well financially and was received mixed, but it certainly has a legacy. And then he got into the DC universe in 2013 with his reimagining of Superman with the film Man of Steel. It was a hit. It was not nearly as big of a hit as Nolan's Dark Knight films, of course. I had forgotten Christopher Nolan was actually involved with that film. He was a co-producer and he got a story credit as well. We got a new Superman, Henry Cavill, and of course we're here today to talk about the follow-up to that film, Batman vs. Superman. By this point, when this film came out in early 2016, the MCU was dominating the superhero genre. Right, I think, was it in phase 3 by that point, or phase 2 was still going on? It would have been right about then.
It would have been like phase 3.
At least. Phase 3 would have that was Civil War the same year, right?
Exactly.
Right, okay. So the MCU was dominating. Marvel had really hit its stride, and I remember the lead up for this film. It was a big deal. I mean, DC's two biggest superheroes facing off each other. And just for the record, I didn't really like Man of Steel. We talked about this the last time Ivan was on the pod when we were discussing Captain America, the Winter Soldier. We're waiting for a modern day definitive Superman film. And hopefully the one that comes out this summer will be that.
Yeah, and I think we can't not talk about how we've received Henry Cavill's Superman and just this era of DC films, as it's going to really set a lot of expectations for how James Gunn's going to take the DC direction. So it's a very, very fun conversation to be had, especially with just knowing what hasn't worked and the reception to this Snyderverse.
It's a good point you made. And, you know, both of you are, I say this all the time, far bigger comic fans than myself. Man of Steel was not loved when it came out. Would you say like a pretty mixed reception to it?
Well, I'm sure Ivan will agree with me. Comic book nerds are never satisfied.
Yeah, I think it was kind of skewing more positive from the mix. Generally, I think if we had to summarize it, it was a mixed reaction, but I think most people that at least from what I've seen, have kind of skewed a little bit more towards the positive on it. And I think a lot of it had to do with Henry Cavill in the role, I feel like. There's little qualms that people had with that movie. Have you guys haven't covered Man of Steel on here, right?
No.
Yeah.
I do think it's one of those Zack Snyder films that I don't think that movie's terrible, but I do think that it definitely is. There's a lot to appreciate there that I feel like that movie, I think I've seen it recently, has kind of aged a little bit better than some of the other stuff that I've seen that I haven't really liked by him. But I think generally over the comic book nerd consensus, I guess, was mixed. But I think for the most part, people were like, okay, well, we're kind of hyped for what else is coming.
Yeah, and this was also a very different take on Superman. That's very fair. This is a very different take on the DC universe. I think that with that polarization and that mixed response, I think in retrospect, more people appreciate Henry Cavill more, especially as his just celebrity and persona has grown in just the general just popular culture. There's a lot more people that were even pushing for Henry Cavill to come back as Superman, right?
And correct me if I'm wrong, Anton, but around this time we also saw the big reboot comic book wise from DC, right? Like where they
That's right.
took 70 plus years of stories and were like, we're
what was
scrapping
it? The new, not the New 52. It was.
I think it was the New 52.
Oh yeah, then it was the New 52. Which, as we say that, Pat's like, what?
What is this?
But yeah, no, it was a Superman with a collar. I think was New 52 Superman.
Very edgy.
Yeah, so
very
it's a big moment for DC to try to not only allow new readers to be able to not have to worry about reading the entire history of DC Comics to be able to jump in, but then also jump on the excitement of having this new Snyderverse of the DC, and again, as you said, Pat, capitalize on the already strong locomotive that was the MCU. So I think they saw it about 2 miles ahead, and then DC producers were like, well, do you think we could catch that train?
I'm sure the Warner Brothers executives were sitting in their boardroom saying, Marvel's kicking our ass. We need to do something about this quick.
And then I like to think that there's always a glass case in the office, and it's like, break if you need Batman.
I'd always kind of heard whisper, and I don't know how much of it is true, but I feel like even on set, I feel the consensus, or I guess the big rumor was that this was originally meant to be 2 movies, and because the higher ups were concerned about, to Pat's point, like they're looking at Marvel and they're like, hey, there's so much money that we can make in this. I think there was a lot of studio pressure to try to make this the big jumping point for Warner Brothers to try to catch some of that market.
100%, yeah.
Hence where I feel like they got that whole Dawn of Justice subtitle there, and the many things that happened in this movie that just felt like some of them just kind of got squeezed in.
So this movie comes out. It would be kind to say that this had a lukewarm reception. Critics loathed it. It has a 29% Rotten Tomatoes score, which is particularly bad. It opened strong. I was just looking at the numbers. It's impressive and unimpressive at the same time. It made $422 million its first weekend, which is an incredible amount of money. But it dropped 81% the second weekend. So basically, it made half the money of its box office run in one weekend. So it fell well below what Warner Brothers wanted. They did end up getting their own cinematic universe, but it was not in the way they wanted it.
Yeah, I think the drop off was pretty steep. Would you say it was 89% or 81%?
81%.
81 is massive, because I think
historic. Yeah,
it's like what I think the rule of thumb is, like if you're at like in the 40s or 50% drop, then that's viewed as like the norm from first weekend to second weekend and so on and so forth. That's huge.
I didn't see this in the theater, probably because I didn't love Man of Steel, and I was just like, I'll catch it later.
There was a lot of hype surrounding this release, but I feel like there was a lot of criticism on pretty much everything that kind of came out. So there was some sort of anticipated, I guess, backlash, because I think like and I don't know if it's like a DC thing, but anytime we hire a new Batman actor and a new actor for any role, I guess comic book wise, there's always an enormous amount of criticism before we actually get the finished product. Did you have any thoughts about the casting of like someone like a Ben Affleck into the role? Because I say Ben Affleck in particular because I don't think the rest of the characters were really given that much of a spotlight. But
well, it didn't bother me. I was pretty neutral on it. Unlike Marvel, by this point, I had no history with any of these characters other than Superman, played by Henry Cavill, who I just don't think it's a very good film. It's not horrible, but I didn't have any type of relationship with this series. And the fact that we're going to talk about this, the fact that they were trying to fast track this into something we needed to have a history with, I don't remember like thinking much of it at all.
I remember there was a lot of I guess fan backlash on Ben Affleck's casting, but I think like that kind of comes par for the course, since we've got like any role that has a history of whoever, I guess, having the mantle for quite a bit of time is going to get that moving forward. But I do think that this was the first time I think that I saw that we had a jump, right? Because you had the very big, critically acclaimed and fan-loved Christopher Nolan trilogy, and now we're jumping into this. There was a little bit of a set expectation, I guess, that it was going to be Christian Bale, I guess, carrying over to this film, which I could not see those worlds meshing together.
Not at all. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that reminds me of something that I had completely forgotten. I just assumed, because this was a DC movie, that it was supposed to be the same universe as Nolan's. And I found out sometime around the time this film came out that, like, no, it's actually not related to Nolan's trilogy. This is an entirely separate universe. And I remember that being somewhat of a turnoff for me.
I don't think you were alone in that, because I feel like that expectation was kind of set. Because when that first trailer for Man of Steel dropped, I remember the teaser trailer really well, because I felt like it was a very nice little haunting trailer to tease that movie. But Christopher Nolan was in big bold letters in that
Yeah,
those
right.
credits.
Right.
Yeah,
so you're like, oh, obviously it's the same universe. It must be.
Yeah, because you have that visual, and so you're like, okay, well, if Christopher Nolan's involved, then definitely they're obviously continuing that universe, or like this is part 2 or whatever for it.
Well, let me start on the production history then, and feel free to chime in and correct me if I get anything wrong here, because there's a lot to this movie. The origins for this specific project date back to the early 2000s. Wolfgang Petersen was originally going to direct this. He is a name that is probably familiar to our podcast listeners. We've covered a couple of his films before, Troy and Air Force One. He was really a big name director. This was going to be based on a screenplay written by Andrew Kevin Walker, but after consideration, Petersen actually decided to make Troy instead. Now, around the same time that stalled out, Christopher Nolan ended up making Batman Begins, which was released in 2005. And Bryan Singer made Superman Returns, which was released in 2006. That was one of the most expensive movies ever made at the time, Superman Returns, and it was a disappointment at the box office to Warner Brothers. That wrecked the plans for Batman vs. Superman, which Warner Brothers was hoping to release somewhere around 2009. So this was a project that was going to happen before this, and it got repurposed into what you eventually worked on, Ivan. Around the same time that Man of Steel was released in June 2013, Warner Brothers announced that Zack Snyder and David S. Goyer were collaborating on a sequel. David S. Goyer, another name that our podcast listeners will be familiar with. He is responsible for the war crime Blade Trinity. Snyder confirmed at San Diego Comic-Con that the film would feature Superman and Batman meeting for the first time on film. Christopher Nolan was barely involved this time. He received an executive producer credit, but to your point, Ivan, it sounds like he really wasn't involved in this at all. He just kind of, his name was attached.
Yeah, I think from my understanding, he went to bat for Zack Snyder, and for basically to try and get him a bit more authority in some of the decision making. And since Christopher Nolan's coming off of a very, very successful franchise for Warner Brothers, wherever he puts his weight in, the pendulum will swing that way in his favor.
Goyer spent most of the rest of the year working on the screenplay, and in December, Chris Terrio was hired to rewrite it due to Goyer's commitments to other projects. Weird, or maybe not weird if you think about it, connection to Ben Affleck. Chris Terrio wrote the screenplay to Argo, which of course starred in and directed by Ben Affleck, which won Best Picture. Chris Terrio won an Academy Award for his work on that film. So I wonder if that's how Affleck's involvement in this really started. The film's official title, Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, or sorry, we've been calling it the wrong thing. It's Batman v Superman. I must apologize to all the purists out there. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice was revealed in May 2014. Years later, Chris Terrio revealed that the title was not his, and Snyder confirmed that the title was decided by studio executives and that he had fought for the abbreviation of the word versus in the title. Potential titles that the pair initially wanted included Justice League Foundations, Justice League Rising, and Son of Sun and Night of Night.
Son of Sun, Night of Night, that definitely could have been a Broadway show.
I mean, Batman v Superman is a good court drama name, I feel like.
Son of Sun and Night of Night sounds like an ABBA album.
Yep. I love that.
Snyder wanted an older Batman to play against a younger Superman. Ryan Gosling, Joe Manganiello, Richard Armitage, Max Martini, and Matthew Good were considered for the role before Ben Affleck was cast. Can you imagine that in a trailer? And Max Martini as Batman. Doesn't work.
I mean, Ryan Gosling doesn't look like he's been ever very old, so that also would not have worked.
No, he's more of a Robin. Or you know what? No,
Nightwing.
Nightwing. Yeah, Nightwing. Yeah, he'd be a good Nightwing, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
That's another question for you comic book guys. Why hasn't Nightwing been in a film? What are they waiting for?
Technically, Robin's outfit was much closer to Nightwing than it was to Robin in Batman and Robin.
Wait, yeah, kind of. Wait, yes, I think you're right.
He was only Robin by name, I feel like.
Yeah, why didn't I see that before?
but that film sucks, so...
No, it didn't. It was one of the best movies of all time.
Look, Ivan, I'll just tell you now, I unironically like Batman Forever.
Look, I have a soft spot.
I really like it.
Those last two Batman movies of the 90s have a soft place in my heart. Not only because I checked them out of Blockbuster right before it closed and I was able to keep those VHSs, but but because to me those were the only two Batman movies I had access to until I was like, whenever Batman Begins came out. I don't know how old I was at that point, but that was my Batman, besides the animated show. But
I'm going to say it now, and I'm going to say it on that episode, Anton. Dark and depressing should not have a monopoly on Batman.
Nor all of the DC universe.
I agree. Not to kind of skip ahead, but like I am curious for both of you guys' opinion on this, because I feel like one of the things that I like about this film in the casting was Jeremy Irons as Alfred. I actually enjoyed it.
Yeah, he's great.
He is very smart, just plays with dialogue so well. Just a very charming Alfred.
Yeah. I enjoyed Andy Serkis in the last one too, but I don't know, there's something about Jeremy Irons that I felt like I don't know, I immediately clicked and accepted him for Alfred.
He's awesome. Yeah.
No,
I completely agree with you.
My favorite part about both of those films, this movie and the Justice League film, that the Zack Snyder version of it.
Yeah, so Ben Affleck is cast as Batman. More on that later. Jason Momoa auditioned for Batman. No idea how that would have worked, but they cast him as Aquaman instead. It was announced that Wonder Woman would be appearing to be played by Gal Gadot. Snyder almost cast Adam Driver as Dick Grayson / Nightwing. There you go. And Carla Gugino as Catwoman. Principal photography began in May 2014 in Detroit. Additional filming took place in Chicago beginning in November, as well as other places in Illinois, as well as the South Pacific. The planned shoot in Morocco was shifted to New Mexico due to incidents related to the 2014 Ebola outbreak. Shooting wrapped up in December of that year. An estimated $165 million was spent on marketing, bringing the total cost to $428 million. So this film barely made a profit.
Ooh.
That's the production history.
One of the things that I appreciated, or at least that I noticed when I was recently in LA and in Hollywood, or in Hollywood, you really see all the marketing and the big posters around each studio for what's being released. Ivan, do you remember just like full walls of like on the sides of buildings promoting Batman v Superman?
Yeah.
Was there anything a bit more guerrilla marketing or egregious that you remember from the marketing for the film?
Comic-Con the year before that, and I can't speak to San Diego, but New York, they were really heavily promoting the film and making a big deal out of the whole like LexCorp stuff.
Yeah.
So I think they were handing out cell phone chargers, the little mobile like those expensive mobile battery things. I forget what you call the power banks.
Yeah.
With the LexCorp logo and all that, and they had you go through this little like experience for you to claim them. But that was neat. They were really going like for the more they were harping on this really, really heavily. But I do think that it kind of shows, right? Like not the confidence, but I feel like they were putting all their eggs in a single basket, saying like, okay, like this is a surefire hit. And on paper, it kind of should have been, right? Like you got the two big superhero names of DC. What went wrong? I guess
let's talk about it.
Good segue.
Yeah.
Ivan, again, feel free to just jump in with any knowledge that you have that you can bring here. It's like I just want to start. The first reason I just wrote down bloated. If I had to pick one word to describe this film, bloated would be it. This is such a dense film. It's jam-packed with multiple storylines weaving together. You know what it feels like? I feel like I'm watching as many storylines as I was on something like Game of Thrones.
Yeah, and the length of the film lends itself to that.
Yes. when I first saw this, which was actually quite recently, I probably should have stated this to both of you earlier. I had never seen this all the way through. I had seen bits and pieces of it, but to prepare for this episode was actually the first time that I actually tried to watch it start to finish. More on that later. I knew peripherally some of the things that were happening that they were trying to set up. So I knew that it was ostensibly more than just a tale of Batman versus Superman, but I underestimated just how much was in this. I suppose they had to justify it with some extra subtitles there. But what this means to someone like me, my biggest takeaway from this film, and why I think this is a complete failure, is it fails at the following things for me as a pretty casual comic fan. It fails to be a good Batman movie. It fails to be a good Superman movie. It fails to be a satisfying story of Batman facing off against Superman. And I think it fails to be a successful setup for the Justice League. I don't think it does any of those things competently.
Yeah, and very, very fair points. And Ivan, I'd love your thoughts on this too, because you basically hinted it. There's multiple movies in this film. Now they gave Wonder Woman a proper origin film, which fit much more naturally. I actually really enjoyed that film, the first Wonder Woman film.
After this, right?
Yes, after this. And if there could have been more patience on the studio side to say, hey, like, let's do this properly, let's give it a right timeline, let's set it up with good writers in the same way that they're kind of doing now with James Gunn's, at the helm, there's probably a lot more care and probably have a better product in the end. But instead, you just have a very fast schedule to catch the train that the MCU is on. And I think that pressure that pressure just forced the studio to basically mix all of the ideas together to just speed up that timeline and getting something out of the door for an ultra big multi-star Justice League, which ended up just tripping.
I think their biggest mistake, talk about the studio itself, was they looked at Marvel and thought, we can put Zack Snyder, the guy that's going to direct the next movie in this series of films, as the big creative guy that's going to net everything together. And I think they wanted him to be the big producer of everything, the Kevin Feige of Marvel. But one of the big issues is like, you take somebody like Kevin Feige, who kind of, he tested himself being like low-level PA and then producer, and then worked his way up in these early Marvel films that had nothing to do with the MCU. So he kind of got the experience. He was a big comic book nerd. He kind of knew how to, he knew what the connective tissue should be, but he also had the industry experience. And then you take somebody like Zack Snyder, who I feel, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but there's a term in film school that they always like pushed on us, which was the auteur. You have directors have certain flavors to them that they kind of have their, like, if you see a Martin Scorsese film, you're like, all right, within 5 or so minutes, you're like, all right, this is a Martin Scorsese film because it has XXX. It's got these different parameters that a Martin Scorsese film has. And I feel like Zack Snyder kind of feels the same way, at least visually. But this is a guy that's not necessarily the big creative guy that should be constructing your world. This is the guy that comes to you with a good idea that you then can fit into something. But I don't think he was the best choice for to be the architect of this universe. And I think that they forced him into that role, which then meant that he didn't deliver a project that I feel like could have been, if not great, like at least a decent film. And we kind of talked about this offline, I think, before, but there's a director's cut of this film that's a half hour longer than this cut that I feel like I enjoyed significantly more. And it's almost kind of ludicrous to say, because you're like, how's a half hour more going to add to this experience? But I do feel like they cut out a good number of like substance heavy scenes that could have made this work. But then also, arguably, why does it have to be 3 hours for us to enjoy a good story? Well, I think the answer is because they try to overstuff this, and there's no way the way that it was shot, at least there was no way to edit it shorter and have deliver that same quality that longer cut delivered.
You said the word auteur. I agree with you. I think Snyder is that. And one of the things I associate with the word auteur is like full control. But to your point about the director's cut, did he have full control over this? Because if I'm just looking at this as a movie and not necessarily the overarching DCEU, which I guess is the proper term for it, right? I found this film hard to follow. which makes me think he was forced to cut stuff out. The editing and the pacing are quite strange. There's a lot of weird transitions between different scenes. There's like rapid cutting between scenes despite the film's length. And with all of the storylines going on, I just wonder how much he was forced to cut out and compromise in this.
There is a interview somewhere, and I don't recall off the top of my head where he said this from, but I think he said that there were about 2 hours of footage that was trimmed out of his initial cut. Now, that's not out of the norm. Like, anytime a director will deliver something, it'll be multiple hours long. Like, I think Phantom Menace was like a 5-hour long movie originally when they presented it. I would love to see that 5-hour cut, but
I don't think you'd make it through it.
I don't think he had the ultimate freedom and decision that someone like a Kevin Feige over at Marvel had. That being said, even if he did, I don't think he was the right person to have that.
He's
control.
Not a writer.
No, he's not. And I think I mentioned this in the last episode I was on, but I do feel like Zack Snyder knows what he's doing visually. I feel like you can take a Zack Snyder movie and screenshot a whole bunch of things and make it a great PC wallpaper. But on that level, I think he's great. I think the cinematography is really good. I think he's always has one particular collaborator with him on it. But when it comes to story, he falls flat. I think he's a great ideas guy. I think a lot of the stuff that he does is grand and great, but it fails to deliver and stick with you because I feel like it's one of those things where it's like when you're a kid and you get a new toy and you become obsessed with the features of the toy. And so that's now your thing for the rest of it. Like, it's the same way he treats slow-mo in a lot of these films.
In this film alone, we have the following subplots. Batman's vendetta against Superman, Superman's struggle for acceptance, Lex Luthor's, let's call them machinations.
If we're calling it Lex Luthor's machinations, should we call it Batman's racism?
White Portuguese. Couldn't he have just Googled that was a ship, by the way? I don't know. Anyway, we also have the introduction of Wonder Woman. We have the setting up of the Justice League, and then in the final act, we get the Doomsday Battle, right, which becomes another subplot. We're talking about one film. Quite a lot.
Quite a lot, and I don't think you even touch on all of the B plots for each of those plots.
No, and to Ivan's point, they were trusting a guy like Zack Snyder to do this much juggling with the story in just one film, while also trusting him to set up. Did they know they were making the Justice League by this point?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
they were okay. They were already like in the works of this. Okay.
Endgame, wink wink, was of course the Justice League.
Okay. So yeah, he's not the guy for that.
Well, in retrospect, it's very clear Zack Snyder was not the guy for that. But I don't think that the way that it was set up necessarily set him up for success either. I think what benefited Disney and Marvel, of course, is the way things naturally played out. They got very lucky with how things were received over time, the dedication to like proper storytelling and craft over time as well. Things aligned very well for Marvel and DC as they built the MCU. This is much more, how can we recreate that lightning in a bottle? And I think this is with any industry. It's impossible to recreate that same excitement or that same success in a formulaic way.
They were trying to shortcut it.
Right.
And you nailed it, Anton. Like, what I remember when I saw the first Avengers film in the theaters, and we're just talking about Phase 1, right? They earned that with the 5 previous films. Just like by the time you get all the way up to Infinity War and Endgame, yeah, like, you know what? I didn't like every single film in the MCU that had gotten to that point. I think some of them were kind of boring. There was a couple misfires, right? But they earned that moment. DC was trying to shortcut that. They watched all of the Phase 1 movies that the MCU did, and they tried to cram all of that storytelling into one big bloated mess of a movie, which was this.
It's also the intention from the get-go, right? Because Marvel Studios itself was a studio focused on just Marvel movies that at some point got bought out by Disney, but Disney allowed them to keep being Marvel Studios. They're not under the umbrella and like having to report to another big Disney bigwig who then he reports to Bob Iger. It was Kevin Feige reports to Bob Iger during that time. So it's its own thing. It's its entity, and its sole purpose is to create movies based on this one world. Warner Brothers, on the other hand, was Warner Brothers Studio. It was focused on making multiple different movies across multiple different brands and IP that they had. So there was no structure there to support creating this kind of universe out. And now it's different because now with the acquisition, DC and James Gunn and Peter Safran now have their own DCU studios. They're focused on it. They have the resource for it, but they don't have to answer to anybody but themselves. And that's a very, very different step than the way that Warner Brothers was set up during the time that this film came out.
Can I even take another step back and say how disjointed the studio was for DC and Warner Brothers, in that not only is it, there's no centralized like Marvel Studios for Warner Brothers, there's no figurehead for a centralized vision for long-term success. I want to remind folks that DC Entertainment was the Warner Brothers arm for just any DC film, which was created in like the mid 2000s. They released Jonah Hex as the first technically first DCEU in 2010, which Ivan, I don't know if you remember Jonah Hex.
Is that the one with Megan Fox in it?
Yeah, it has Megan Fox.
That is the Marvel equivalent to me of Howard the Duck.
Right. It's just such an obscure release film. But on that same line, you have technically under DC Entertainment, you have Red, Green Lantern, Dark Knight Rises, interestingly enough. But then you start to kind of get this idea of, hey, maybe we should just move this closer to like build out our own MCU. So it really does feel like it was just trying to run with something and trying to see what sticks on the wall.
You know what it reminds me of? A team that instead of trying to build an actual competitive team, they just try to buy a bunch of expensive free agents.
The Brooklyn Nets.
Correct. Exactly. Or what the Clippers did kind of recently.
Yeah. It's
with Kawhi, and then they realized oh yeah, the guy you're paying the max contract to, he's only available like 1/3 of the time.
Well, it's a really good analogy in that it fits, again, it just fits so many industries. It's not just, I don't think it's just movies, but everyone's trying to say, how can we recreate success and how can we shortcut it? And they probably look at some key factors that lead to that success, whether it's make sure that it's comic books. But instead of focusing on what makes certain comic book films great, it's just more focusing on make sure that it's comic books. Let's put big stars behind it and a lot of money behind it. And then they forget about writing.
It's unforgivable they didn't give this version of Batman his own movie.
Really should have.
Because they got, look, we can talk about this now if you want. They got the Batman parts right. I think most people would agree with that.
Batman warehouse scene?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, my favorite parts of this film are not related to action at all. It's any of the scenes of not even Batman in his suit. It's just Ben Affleck being Bruce Wayne, interacting with Alfred, going to the party, interacting with what's her name, Diana Prince. Wonder Woman. Like that's my favorite parts of this movie.
Yeah, and it sincerely just there's a better Batman movie in this film, but also, we didn't have Alfred talking about the Wayne family being part of the Underground Railroad, so that's probably a big benefit for the film.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich? I'll get drive-through. We were missing that scene.
I just missed a bad credit card, personally.
I was missing Ben Affleck saying, "I don't wear hockey pants."
I was disappointed at the fact that I thought I liked Ben Affleck, the casting for Ben Affleck right off the bat. I thought, here's a guy that had a bit of a build. He looked like comic book Bruce Wayne to me. And that suit, I feel like that's the best live action Batman suit we've gotten to date. That comparing it to the comic books, I feel like he had the silhouette right. Visually, everything looked right, and I agree with you, Pat. I feel like my favorite bits are probably the Batman stuff. There was a lot there that I feel like they could have dug into. They could have focused on a little bit more, but we just and they teased us with it, but they never really got to it.
You weren't riveted by the congressional hearing?
Oh, I loved it, especially the pee in the cup thing. best bit.
I have a question about that for you both. Superman is being held accountable by the United States Congress for events that occur in Africa, but not for his part in the destruction of Metropolis, which is in the United States, which I'm going to assume tens of thousands of people die during that battle with Zod, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain this?
Look, it's the easy thing is they're just trying to build up the drama in the film. It's just way too serious. It's the most annoying congressional hearing that you're probably going to get in a comic book film.
Okay, so you agree with me that makes little to no sense.
The way that they played it, they just played it way too straight.
So that's where I feel like the extended cut kind of comes into play here, because I feel like they made the effort to try and make it make sense. Like, for example, and listen, I might be, when I saw this film for the first time, I missed this detail, but the whole them framing Superman for the destruction of that little, what was when Lois Lane goes in there to meet with the terrorist guy, I forgot his name.
He's like a warlord or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but he's like the head of a terrorist group or something, and she goes in, and then Superman has to come in and save her. But there was massive destruction afterwards. They end up killing the entire village, and they framed that on Superman. I didn't really catch that in the theatrical cut of this film, at least the first time I saw it.
No, it's not clear at all.
No, but in the extended cut, they go out of their way to show the hitmen that are there burning the bodies to make it look like they all got lasered.
Oh gosh!
But weren't they also shot? Like, wouldn't they be able to tell? Like, well, these people were shot with bullets, so it's probably not Superman that did this. Yeah,
it was Superman with an SMG and his lasers that did the whole thing. Clearly,
can you imagine that Superman with SMGs?
It was Superman with an MP5 in the library.
But no, like the extended cut provides a little bit more context as to why those things are going. But here's like my problem with that is, number one, I just don't care enough for it to occupy that much time in the film. I feel like there were other plots that they could have done with. And to your point, Pat, like it made no sense for me that they harped on him for this, but the destruction of Metropolis, they're just like, I guess we're chill with that, because
not only were they chill with it, they built him a statue.
Yeah.
Which then crippled Scoop McNairy later vandalizes.
Which, like, throughout the entire film.
Oh my god.
That's true.
The scenes where he's in his apartment and he's got all like, he's got the like newspaper clippings up and he's just like, it's so bad.
Throughout the entire movie, I was kind of on Batman's side every time he brought up the whole destruction of Metropolis and all that. I'm like,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah, Batman makes a very compelling case every time.
And that's the thing. Like, I know there are some people that kind of weren't happy that Batman was killing people in this movie, or like any of the other big issues they had with. I think that was just that might have been the big point, but
that was not the biggest problem with this movie.
No, it wasn't. It was far from it. And I feel like if we're gonna play that, technically it's either life-crippling injuries that Batman will give you, or we just pretend he didn't kill that one person that he slams into the wall, possibly breaking his neck. But like all Batman movies, I feel like you have that kind of. It hasn't been really brought up to the forefront at all. I don't know why people kind of harped on it this time.
We teased this earlier, the lengthy post-production process. 15 months.
Jeez.
I think that both of you like this movie visually a lot more than I do. I will say this, for the amount of money they spent on this movie and for how long the post-production process is, there is not a single impressive shot in the film to me. I mean, yeah, some of the action scenes are, I think, well done, but considering the budget and how much time they took to make this, there's nothing special about any of the CGI. And frankly, the CGI during the Doomsday sequence is bad.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess where a lot of that post-production goes, and it's trying to make this film make sense either with, again, cuts, or how are we splicing things together, but then also making a really, really bad Doomsday. I don't think that there's any other way around it. That Doomsday looks terrible.
I will say one thing just to kind of shed a little bit about what I think delay was. I don't think it was that it was taking that long. I think this was a time period where almost every post house was booked. So whoever was going to work on post production, if you had even the slight production delay, you're kicking the can down the road a bit more. And I think the reason why it took that long is that, and then also they rushed it to try and catch up with Marvel's movie that was coming out during that time too. Was it Civil War?
Civil War came out about 2 months after this.
Okay,
and then you're already competing right with. That's a really, really good point, Ivan, because you have Suicide Squad that released that same year. You have Deadpool, which I don't think used as many resources. Probably, I would just assume. I know that first Deadpool film was a smaller budget.
It was.
Yeah, and a lot of that was in-house from my understanding.
But then probably Rogue One that takes all of ILM for a long time.
Yeah, so I feel like the usual suspects weren't really available to work on this film. At least I know from the period of like 2013 all the way to like 2017, there's a big shortage of post houses that are able to do the things that Hollywood films need them to do.
That makes a lot of sense because I don't want to be too cruel in this, but like I looked at the budget and I'm like CGI is kind of
Well, so then, or we could just applaud the fact that the film was able to really leverage the strengths of the Long Beach Community College design house. So, you know, that's who they were able to go to, just because everyone else was booked.
I think this is also why we got
shout out Long Beach.
Shout out Long Beach.
Long Beach.
I had heard that part of there was plans to have a full like Wayne Manor established, but because of the budget, they had to basically make it the way they did in the film, where it's like this different. It's fancy enough for our taste, but here, you know, there you go. That's as much as we can get.
Question about that.
Batcave, yes.
Wayne Manor is burned down, and he's living in some like glass rectangular thing on the edge of like a lake.
Things are very bleak for Batman in this universe.
But what's the context of that?
He's into modern cubism.
Yeah, I don't think
art design.
I'm agreeing with Ivan here. I don't think that there's necessarily a callback to anything in the comics in particular. You know, listeners, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's literally just like, all right, if I'm a rich person, I'm into this design.
Yeah, I don't.
So that like cubism, whatever house he was living in, like that was Wayne Manor at that point.
Yes, I think if I remember correctly, the whole like newspaper clippings and stuff where that the house was burned down at some point.
Right. Okay. You understand why I'm asking though, because remember he wakes up at one point and he's like crushing like a 51 Burgundy, and there's some dime piece in bed with him. I thought it was the woman's house, and he was just like, I gotta sneak out of here. But no, that was his place.
That's his summer home. It's now his permanent home, but it was
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah. Things are tough for Batman in this film.
There's so many. I feel like Batman has switched around a lot, right? Like in the Robert Pattinson one, Wayne Manor also doesn't, or is Wayne Manor in there? Because I feel like he lives in the city.
He lives in the set of The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, but that's an apartment though, isn't it? Like he's in the middle of the city. There's no like Wayne Manor in that film, I think. I could be totally wrong and just not remembering.
I'm trying to remember, but I know at least for when we got Flashpoint, Wayne Manor was really nice, if just not it looked more, what was it? It looked more like something that was on HGTV.
Yeah, but that's retired Batman.
Are they overthinking all this? Just have Batman live in a mansion. Just get it out of the way.
It's just so hard to find mansions available to shoot in.
Yeah.
It kind of is.
I don't know.
I was going to say, it's hard to find Wayne Manor.
They're spending $400 million to make the movie. They could do it.
I mean,
look, if it was really that simple, they could have done it, because they spent $400 million on it. That's all I'm saying.
So there's this like joke that they use the same 3 or 4 mansions across all movies in Hollywood. And so I feel like recently people have been kind of distancing themselves from that. Like even the X Mansion, right? Like we barely see that in any of the X-Men films that came out more recently. It's not as much of a character as it was from the first films.
No, because they don't film in Canada anymore. The first couple X-Men films were filmed in that mansion was in Toronto.
And they shot enough B-roll to use it in the next couple films too.
That's my trivia for you comic book nerds there. You didn't see that one coming, did you?
I did not.
You know, speaking of bloated, the fact that there's a longer version of this film is just horrifying to me.
And Ivan, you've watched it multiple times, right?
Yeah.
I watched it once.
Oh, you did watch it, Anton?
Yeah, I watched it once.
Is it better?
There's more context. I wouldn't necessarily say better.
It's not better. You just understand things a little bit more.
It just felt like, in the same way when I watched the Snyder Cut, it's like, I guess it makes a little bit more sense.
Well, for Justice League? Yeah. Did you get through the whole 4 hours on that movie?
I did, just because I really wanted to see Green Lantern, and I was so disappointed.
I don't remember when I stopped watching it, but I got through most of it, I think.
It's nuts. Like, watching that and just knowing I'll never get that 4 hours of my life back.
It was marginally better than the theatrical cut by Joss Whedon, but it wasn't not like a 4 hour worth
I love
watch.
reading all the theories that it was just Snyder pushing all of the marketing. Like, we want the Snyder cut, said Zack Snyder.
I would believe it. I mean, look at how many bots were on Twitter. Apparently, there's a couple of things I do want to say about this movie that I feel like are a bit positive, right? Because we already kind of talked about, like, we more or less enjoyed the Batman parts of this film. I really like a lot of the visual stuff in this film, the design wise, except for Doomsday. I'll just ignore Doomsday for the rest of this thing. The Batmobile I really enjoyed. I thought it was a nice, fresh take on the Batmobile because up until this point, we kind of saw a lot of the same kind of styles shown on screen. I liked the kind of a blend, right, of like the old 90s, like, here's your fast car versus the tank armored thing that we saw in the Nolan trilogy. This was a nice little blend of the two. The bat suit I thought was really, really nice. I actually enjoyed the Superman suit in this film. I don't think it's any different than it was in Man of Steel, but for some reason I thought it looked a little better. Maybe because the red and the blue kind of popped in the rest of this really kind of very poorly lit in some in some scenes film.
Awkwardly color corrected film.
Yeah, I like that they gave Batman a full on Batcave in this, complete with the little tribute that he had for Robin in that display case that we lingered on for a little bit too long without giving any sort of backstory for it, but sure.
Yeah, that felt a little masochistic, right?
Yeah, I like the armored suit. I thought that was a nice little twist to it.
That's probably my favorite.
As a comic book nerd, though, the minute that they showed the trailer or the announcement for this film and they had this giant, massive bat symbol on it, clearly they're going for that old
Dark Knight Returns.
The Dark Knight Returns story, which I kind of would have preferred that they went that route and showed us that story completely disconnected from anything else. But yeah, I appreciated a lot of the stuff that this movie tried to give us, but it didn't hold a lot of weight ultimately. And I think a lot of it had to do with like a rushed execution of it. Do I think there's a world where there's a better movie here coming out if Zack Snyder had more time or more resources or whatever? Sure, maybe, but I just don't think that they had the right people and the right things in place to make this an actual like universe jumping off point for any sort of world building. And I think that ultimately is what kind of tanks this movie, because it doesn't really work as a standalone film either.
No. Let's get into the writing of this. We've already been, I think, touching on this all over the place, but would it have killed him to put a joke in this movie?
Yes, it would have.
It's dour. The humorless piece of this, even the Nolan films had funny stuff in them, and it's almost like Snyder and the writers were allergic to any type of humor. I'm not saying that it needed to be a joke fest like what happened to some of the MCU films, but there is a distinct lack of lightness in this, in addition to the color correcting and the actual literal lighting of scenes, that I don't think it served the film well.
Yeah, my take on it is this was probably too much of a heavy-handed take from Zack Snyder to film a very dramatic piece and making it so serious.
It seemed kitchen sinky to me, if you know what I mean, like where of course they had to show the murder of Bruce Wayne's parents in the beginning of the film. Just like, look, there's two things that I never want to see in another Batman movie. I don't ever need to see Bruce Wayne's parents murdered again, and anything Joker related. I don't want to see the Joker ever again. He's been done to death by this point.
Well, all I'm going to say, Pat, is you're going to be seeing more pearls, and
it's awful.
Let me find the list of people that are going to be Joker in the future.
Now that you've expressed that, Pat, I feel like we're about to get an HBO Max original series, 8 episodes long, all covering leading up to the deaths of Thomas and Martha Wayne.
Wouldn't surprise me.
We'll get a season 2 where it turns out this whole time Thomas Wayne was the Joker the entire time. But that's kind of like the level of I think you're right. There's a lot of like repetitiveness on it. And I think Anton, correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like James Gunn has said, at least for the new universe, that he doesn't want to revisit the origin stories of a lot of these characters.
Yeah, that's what I remember too. Very clear.
Thank you.
Direction.
Thank you, James Gunn.
It makes sense. We have enough content that kind of covers that, especially in this age of streaming. So if the argument is like, well, some people don't know what Batman's origins are, it's like, well, there's picked. There's like
no, they
them.
do. Everyone knows at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just to touch on the new Superman movie a little bit. I'm curious how they introduce a character without introducing a character. You know what I mean? Like, how do you define a hero without having to then show us like him going to prom in Kansas? So that's all I want is like just good writing.
Yeah, I feel like you don't need to show the origins of any hero to establish them and get to like them and all that stuff. I think all that comes from like the plot that you give him, the challenge that you give him, and the way that you write the overcoming of that. But I do feel like this film, to your point, Pat, like the fact that we had to squeeze the death of Thomas and Martha Wayne into the beginning credits, and I think the only reason why they did that is to play off that little bit at the end with Martha Wayne, yeah. And I got it when I first saw the film. I understood where they were kind of going with it, but it's so kind of like there's better ways to express that. Because that was the moment where Batman and Superman, I guess in Batman's mind, he's now relating to Superman, and he sees him as another person that also had a mother and all this stuff. So I get that, but that's probably not the best way to make that point in that moment. It came off as a bit ludicrous.
It was just a bit too much, maybe.
Yeah, and then we got the memes that didn't end for years after that.
Well, writing wise, I think it was actually like pretty cool. Like, yes, like the fact that both of their moms are named Martha, and that kind of exclamation allowed for like a moment of clarity for, hey, realization and just connection. I think writing wise, it's great. I just think the execution was just way too dramatic and just way too much.
Like the way that Lois slid over that line where it's like, oh, that's his mother's name. That they should have stopped there. It shouldn't have been a whole series of like, why did you say that name?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm like, oh, it kind of killed the moment. Otherwise, I would have been like, all right, show that and the quick flash to his parents' death, and there you go. And that should have been the one reference to his parents' death is there instead of the beginning credits.
What's going on with Batman's dream sequences?
Cannabis gummies, 100% cannabis gummies.
I assume that the extended director's cut addresses this more because I had no clue what was going on.
The ayahuasca?
No idea.
It
Very
was
confused.
Anton, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like throughout this is the one like seedling of the events that are coming in Justice League, right? It was supposed to be that Batman's getting some sort of, or someone's trying to communicate with him from the future.
Yeah, but they never address it in the Justice League films.
No.
So it's
Really?
just still no, they don't.
I was gonna say, like, is he clairvoyant all of a sudden?
And that's what they're kind of hinting, but they never address it in the future.
So it's poor writing.
It was supposed to be addressed in Justice League 2.
That's why.
No, apparently it was. There was this like
well, I guess you could probably say it was going to be the Flash, right?
Yeah. But Zack Snyder has said, I don't know where the heck he was. I think it was when they released the actual Snyder cut on HBO Max, but he had this like Q&A thing and somebody asked him about that. He's like, oh yeah, I was going to address it in the sequel. I was like, well, that's a bit way too far.
I hate that shit.
Yeah.
That's you know what it reminds me of, Anton? The same stuff you would hear about the Star Wars prequels, and they're like, oh, well, no, that's explained in the Clone Wars TV series.
Oh, yeah. It's like trying to kind of do a catch-all of like it makes sense because
you
read
if you read the supplemental material, it actually is answered. No, it's not. It makes no sense in the film.
Well, one thing, like I think writing it that way for a major studio makes no sense. So for this, like if Zack Snyder was going to explain things, but it's going to take a couple movies to get there, you shouldn't, because you can't just assume that you're going to get the go-ahead to make the rest of these films. For George Lucas, I feel like the only reason why I feel like I could excuse that is because he had he was his own person there. He's funding his own films. He had his back then. Now it's a completely different story. But for him, I'm like, all right, well, you have the freedom to one day be like, all right, you know what? I'm going to write this one film that is going to explain the rest of the stuff that I did. When you're doing it for a major studio, you don't have any sort of guarantees for it. You should be writing every film like if it's the last one that you're going to be able to make.
But even with Lucas, a movie should be self-contained.
This is kind of the same argument that we've talked about, Pat, around why we love sequels that can stand on their own two legs, because there's no requirement to necessarily see like the first film to really understand the sequel. I do think that it makes the film weaker if there is a huge reliance on the first film, but I won't necessarily not enjoy a film because I need an over reliance on the first film. There are exceptions to that rule where I will like some films. But I think that especially for this film, or even just kind of like building out like this DCEU, I don't think there was enough care and attention put to actual storytelling on the individual film basis.
We needed more Wonder Woman, is what you're saying, Anton.
Which we did.
She should have had her film before this one.
Please correct me. Is it Gal? Is it Gale?
I thought it was Gal Gadot.
Yeah, I think that was my understanding too.
It was Gal.
Gal or Gal, one of those.
Yeah. Whatever you want it to be, Anton.
Yeah.
She's good. She's good in this movie. She's what is she in here? 15 minutes?
7 minutes and 32 seconds.
Right, I have a confession to make to both of you. I didn't make it through this film. I got to the Doomsday reveal and I actually shut it off. This has never happened before in the history of the podcast. I got through Exorcist 2, Anton, and I couldn't make it through this film.
But
wild. You saw him appear and you were like, that is way too ugly. I'm turning it off.
Pretty much, yeah. Like when he gets revealed in the lab, I clicked stop and I was like, I'm good. I just went on the Wikipedia article and read the rest of the synopsis. I couldn't make it through the film.
You missed the best part of the film after that. That's where it becomes a 10 out of 10, right after that moment. Exactly.
Oh, Ivan, that's mean.
Doomsday does look like the cave troll from Fellowship of the Ring. And this is, again, with the budget. That's 15 years after Lord of the Rings. Double the budget. And it's somehow the CGI was worse.
It's really funny when I think about how are we going to depict costuming and appearance for comic book characters in live action. And the comic book version of Doomsday, while as 90s as he looks in the comics, looks way better than what we got on screen for this film.
Yeah, he was missing green shorts and like the little spikes that come out of him.
Was he supposed to look like Lex Luthor?
No.
But okay, I was gonna say because it didn't. But I mean, like, it was created using his DNA, right? So it presumably could have looked like Jesse Eisenberg, right?
I didn't understand that part of it at all.
I didn't either.
Made no sense.
Why did why did Lex Luthor's blood activate the transformation of him? Like, I didn't get that.
If you didn't understand it, there's no way I did. Okay. Maybe Ivan, you can answer this question for me because this is, I think the worst example of writing in the film. So at the party when Clark Kent confronts Bruce about Batman, right? He's like, hey, there's this like vigilante in your city. Does Bruce know that Clark is Superman at that point in the film?
See, as someone who is just watching the film, I would say yeah, because I'm getting major vibes of like they're kind of like staring each other down, like Western style a bit there. But no, because then the whole, Martha was his mother's name too scene kind of comes apart then, because then it's like, all right, well, there's no like, oh, he's also human scene, and the hey, I know you're secretly that guy that I hate, and I'm just gonna stare you down during this 2-minute confrontation. But
right, and then conversely, does Superman know that Bruce Wayne is Batman?
I would feel like he should, right? Because it's like,
but you agree it's not clear.
No, it's not. It's not clear, and I don't think to this day, unless he's like explained it somewhere, but I don't think anyone's really shed light on that moment. And if it's because to me, like I initially read it that like, oh, they know who each other is, like they're kind of grilling each other and staring each other down right now. But again, like the more I think about it, it's like, all right, well then the Martha scene doesn't work later if that's the case, because then one would think Batman would put 2 and 2 together and be like, oh yeah, right, this dude is Clark Kent. He grew up in
it's a giant reveal. Martha?
Yeah.
Also at that point, why does Superman take an interest in Batman only for the purposes of this film? Because by this point, Batman has been operating in Gotham for what, 20 years almost?
Pretty much, yeah.
So it's like, shouldn't Superman have known about Batman before?
So you stumbled on my biggest gripe with this film, and it's a small thing, but I think it's a big thing. And I was just talking to my friend Sandra the other day because we were both talking about I was like, oh, I'm going to be on this podcast. We're going to talk about Batman versus Superman. And the thing that bothers me the most about this entire film is that Gotham City and Metropolis are right next to each other. That just doesn't make any sense to me because there's a Superman right over there. Why is Gotham City still in such poor shape? And also, to your point, why is Superman just now taking an interest in Batman? Like, couldn't he have done something about it pretty quickly? You know, they're in the same vicinity, and that, like, there's some debate in the comic book field as to whether or not Gotham City and Metropolis are right next to each other. There's some depictions that they are, and others that they don't. But to me, it never made sense for this movie that Gotham City and Metropolis were right next to each other. It made absolutely no sense to me at all.
I always thought they were like at least a few hours from one another.
I always thought one was New York and the other one was somewhere in Kansas.
Or like Chicago.
Yeah, or Chicago.
Yeah, well, Metropolis is a stand-in for New York, right?
So could Gotham at the same time.
Yeah.
Sort of.
I always thought of Gotham more as a Chicago.
But it's been depicted like New York in several films, like The Dark Knight Rises, which is stupid.
I was going to say, but it was depicted as Chicago in The Dark Knight.
I know.
I feel like...
not The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight's not a stupid movie. The Dark Knight Rises is.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Oh, yes.
Even though I've gotten into some arguments with that, but I feel like that trilogy is good, but I feel like Begins is my favorite one out of those three.
I agree with you, and I will say it now, and as I said it before, because we covered this on our our second or third episode, Anton. Mm-hmm. I think The Dark Knight Rises is like a genuinely bad movie.
Yeah. You know what the worst part about that movie is, though? Not to get off topic, but...
All of it?
The fight choreography bothers me so much.
Because you didn't like the Gangs of New York style brawl in the middle of the day?
Or the fact that, like, in that fight with Catwoman in the rooftop, all these thugs are just, like, falling over without getting hit at all.
They just don't care.
Oh my god! But yeah, anyway, that my biggest gripe about it was the fact that they were neighbors, and
that's a big point. Anton, I was talking about the fact that Batman's been operating in Gotham for decades. At the point in this film, it's like, why does Superman suddenly take an interest in him?
No, doesn't.
I watched part of the Doomsday fight on YouTube for 30 seconds and then just shut it off. It looks like a video game cutscene.
It's just not entertaining. Look, we can definitely say as many bad things as we want about the very bad CGI, but it's also just not very entertaining as like a fight even, right?
I admittedly didn't watch the whole thing. I watched 30 seconds. I was like, I don't need to see more of this.
I will confess one thing, that I kind of enjoyed Jesse Eisenberg's performance. Not as a Lex Luthor, but I kind of dug what he was doing. But again, not as a Lex Luthor. I feel like it just doesn't fit.
We can talk about the cast now then. Really quick, though. Hans Zimmer's score is very good.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
It's probably the best thing about the film, in my opinion. He doesn't do bad scores. Let's do the cast. We'll get to Eisenberg in a minute. I just want to run through. We'll start with the superheroes for you, Ivan. We liked Affleck. He's great. He deserved his own film. I felt bad that this is the only real thing that he had to work with as Batman, and it's a steaming pile of shit.
I think that there's a lot of public perception that it's easy to make fun of Ben Affleck's acting, and he'll often get ridiculed because of South Park. But at the same time, I really enjoy Ben Affleck, and I thought he was really great as Batman.
He has survived a lot of stink bombs in his career.
He somehow survived Gigli.
He survived Pearl Harbor.
The guy can speak Spanish very, very convincingly too, though. Like, hearing him speak Spanish, it sounds like one of my uncles speaking Spanish from back in Mexico City. Like, he's got that. I guess it makes sense because in Mexico City they got this like accent and way of talking. But I'm like, when I first heard him speak Spanish, it just kind of blew me away. I was like, what
is it? Do you think it's because he was married to J-Lo?
No, J-Lo doesn't know an ounce of Spanish.
Oh,
she's
never mind.
He was he said he grew up in Mexico for a couple of years, apparently, because he was doing some sort of like work or something with his parents. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was convinced. Just a random tidbit in there to throw our flow off there. But
like George Bush, someone you don't expect to speak Spanish but does.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know why it's so funny, but it is.
Well, let me tell you. Let me hablo some English for you.
now watch this drive. Yeah, no, Affleck, not only is he good at Batman, Anton, I talk about this when we mention Batman, you have to be able to play two roles if you're going to be Batman. You have to be Bruce Wayne too, and he excels at the Bruce Wayne scenes. You totally buy him as a billionaire playboy.
Yeah. Do we think maybe that it was really easy for Ben to lean into this, just act like a rich guy?
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, it just looked really natural and just fun.
We've seen this in other films, right? Where they might be good at the Batman parts, but they're not necessarily good at the Bruce Wayne parts and vice versa. Affleck, he gets it right.
Yeah, and in the comics, some writers depict the Bruce Wayne act as a bit more gratuitous than other writers. And just saying that, like, really leaning into how does he act like a playboy? And I think it was just really fun how Ben Affleck depicted in this film.
I don't think this will shock either one of you to learn that my favorite depiction of Batman and Bruce Wayne is the animated series, where he is not a drunken idiot like he's portrayed in the Dark Knight trilogy, but he's like a highly intelligent, active CEO. I love that version of Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, very clearly interested in public policy because of his friendship with Harvey Dent.
Right. And isn't afraid to date hot women.
Yeah. We're talking about the Paul Dini 90s Batman?
Yeah.
Okay. Animated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, series. Ivan, just for some context, like, as you know, I don't read comic books. That was my introduction to Batman, and that's my Batman, the animated series.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of our Batman, because I feel like anytime I pick up a comic, I hear Kevin Conroy's voice. Like, I feel like that's the default.
Yeah.
That's my standard, you know? Also, just talk about, I feel like the Batman voice for Ben Affleck's Batman was a great choice for them to go with that voice modulator instead of having it, having the Ben Affleck, the Christian Bale effect in here.
The gravel.
Yeah, because I always pictured Batman as like not too much of not overdoing the voice, but like obviously it's like very deep and intimidating, which Kevin Conroy nails. But like if you have an actor that can't necessarily hit that consistently and believably, then use a voice modulator. Do it a little bit differently. And I think it worked for me. I don't know about you guys, but
where's the trigger?
No, I think that it was something like right out of the comics, and it was a fun little addition, and it made it different from Christian Bale, so I liked it.
And Jeremy Irons might be my favorite on-screen Alfred. Obviously, Michael Caine had a lot more to do in the Dark Knight trilogy, but Irons is perfect.
Yeah, I buy him as like the ex-spy, the ex-military guy, the guy that's done everything.
Yeah, this is the ex-SAS guy. This is very intelligent, very capable Alfred.
Yeah,
and he's not the Alfred that we saw in the first Batman films, where definitely could break a hip, but
his fishy wife's supposed to be served cold.
Or
horrible.
Or the Alfred that we got with Alicia Silverstone.
Oh, who was suffering from McGregor syndrome?
Yeah. Oh God.
I've never heard it put that way, but
oh man, they phoned that one in, didn't they?
I also enjoyed Andy Serkis's performance as Alfred, although I don't think it's as strong as some of the more recent ones, right? Like I feel like he'd be bottom tier compared to Michael Caine and Jeremy Irons, but
yeah, he was younger Alfred. It was
it reminds me of, well, probably it's on purpose, but there's a current Batman run called it's a new universe for comics. I'm about to lose you, Pat. Absolute Batman.
Oh yeah, I've seen it. I haven't read it, but I have it in my desk over here.
Yeah, and Alfred is just a mercenary badass, and it actually is it leans more into his I guess just his history of having experience like on the field as a spy, and more of a badass and absolute Batman.
That's
and
working
now
class Batman.
I will lose you because I know you haven't seen the new Amazon streaming series.
Okay.
Which is pretty good. It's a pretty good depiction of Batman and Alfred. Have you seen it, Ivan?
No, I haven't. It's not a continuation, right, of the 90s one?
No.
It's like set in, what is it, the 1930s?
Feels like the 30s or 40s. Yeah. They don't say which, but
you almost get like a like not a steampunk villain.
Interesting.
Yeah, kind of. I don't think it's amazing, but I enjoyed it. It was like 10 episodes. Easy watch.
Is it
fireflies in it?
Is it Rough and Gruff Alfred? Like,
no, he's like a kind of like the Alfred from the animated series.
Okay, I gotta check it out.
Yeah, what is it called? I gotta look this up.
I gotta check it out because that was one I was interested in watching.
It's called Batman Caped Crusader.
Okay,
yeah, it's pretty good. I liked it. All right, let's get to Superman. Look, I'm not a fan of Henry Cavill here.
I think it's a very much in retrospect people want, and like this is just my take. Like Ivan, Pat, if you think differently, let me know. But I really do think it's because of how much Henry Cavill really blew up because of The Witcher that there are more people that are clamoring for having Henry Cavill back as Superman. But at the time, I don't think that there were as many people. Like, I don't think a majority of people were like, oh, I love this Superman.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you because like I don't remember when the whole like I guess kind of cult following, for lack of a better term, around this universe started, because I feel like it was very, very uniformly bashed. Whether it's like I'm talking about the DCEU in general, but I don't know. For my personal take, I feel like Henry Cavill was a decent Superman. I don't think he was the Superman that I'd pick by a long shot, but I do feel like I understand why they went with the choices that they went with it. I think Superman is a hard character to get writing wise, and I say that because I feel like for any big studio tentpole film today, I feel like the studios are way too focused on the ideas that work and let's replicate those and then try to get that in. And so whether we're talking about the comic book reboot that happened around that time with the New 52, where they like took away Superman's trunks and made it a whole like uniform suit, and they're like, hey, here's an edgy Superman for you. I feel like the studios took that and felt like, oh, maybe the public will respond better to this type of Superman. I love the 90s animated shows in general, whether it's Justice League, Superman, the Batman show. I think the Superman from that, the one that's like a hopeful optimist, that's the one that I'd like to see portrayed on here. That being said, for what he was given, I thought he did a decent job. And he wasn't given all that much. I think with the right script, we would have gotten a really, really good Superman performance out of Henry Cavill. But this, I feel like the same way that some people would look at the very edgy, wildish takes on Superman that we see coming out of comics here and there.
Yeah, it's I completely agree with you, Ivan. I don't think that he was written very well. I think that Henry Cavill just worked with what he was given. And I'm not gonna penalize him for that.
I will. I'm not a fan of his acting. I don't find him particularly charismatic.
Do you find him handsome?
He's handsome. He physically fits the bill for Superman, sure. But, charisma is more than just good looks. I even felt, this is probably in the minority, but I even felt that Brandon Routh in Superman Returns was a far better portrayal of Superman. The thing with Cavill for me is he seems allergic to being able to smile. Well, hear me out. Like, he comes across as very cold and uncaring, almost like a bully. And yes, I understand part of that is how it's written and how he is being directed to act. And I have a far more of a problem with how Snyder chose to portray Superman, but they might as well have gotten a department store mannequin to play Superman. I don't think he doesn't have a great range of emotion at all.
Would you build a PC with him, though, is the big question, with Henry Cavill? Or would you paint miniatures with him, Warhammer miniatures in particular?
Because it's very well known Henry Cavill is a huge nerd.
He might be a nice guy to hang out with in real life. I don't know. But look, I don't want to be too harsh on him because, like I said, my biggest problem with Superman in this film, which I know both of you will agree with, is why was the decision made to make him an asshole? I was rooting for Batman the whole time. It's almost like Snyder wanted us to root against Superman.
I I thought that was the point.
Was it?
Yeah.
I think that's horrendously bad writing.
Well, you see, if you watch the extended cut,
Right. Well, here's what I will say to that. This is what a better version of this movie would have done. A better version of this movie would have you unsure of who to root for. Remember the movie Heat, where you're sort of rooting for Pacino and De Niro the whole time?
Mm-hmm.
That's what the best version of Batman versus Superman would have been. But Snyder and the writers, they're not good enough to do something like that.
Yeah, well, it's just really funny because that nuance is that's more so for a film that has built up two characters with very distinct, I guess, personalities and platforms that you can clearly identify with probably established films. I think this was you kind of got that with Man of Steel, right? So you have an idea of who Superman is. A majority of this film, or a lot of this film, is spent defining our Ben Affleck Batman. So you don't really get a chance to have that same nuance because of, again, this is just part of the rush nature.
I think what they were trying to go for was Superman's getting criticized and battered, and look at all the great stuff that he's doing. Because you get those little hints from the montage where you see him saving people in that Dia de los Muertos thing in Mexico City, and then you see him saving people from like a nuke. Then you see, and all this was done through like a montage as the voiceover of different reporters criticizing his actions and all that play out. So I feel like that was their idea of getting you to realize how unfair, I guess, people are being towards Superman, to kind of justify the portrayal of him being a bit dickish, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I don't think it was enough. And I think also they started this out a bit wrong, because I think the Superman that we would feel sorry for on it would be the Superman that's still the overly optimist guy, the guy that's like doing stuff like the guy that somebody would look at him and be like, oh, that guy's a little bit of he's a little corny because he's always like doing, he's a bit of a Boy Scout. And you don't necessarily get that from this Superman. So there's not really much for you to root for, because you're like, what is he? Why are they criticizing him so much? He fits the palette that this world already kind of, painted.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not as much of a visual or reinforced opposition to Superman that I think would have driven that point home. And even if it were, you already have a whole movie that established the complete opposite of that.
You're right. And the other part of why I don't like Cavill in the role, he portrays Clark Kent as the same asshole that he does as Superman. Like, where he confronts Bruce Wayne at the party?
Threateningly.
That's not a very accurate categorization of Clark Kent. I know I'm not a comic expert, but like he's the same asshole as Superman that he is as Clark Kent. There's no difference in the performance at all.
Yeah. Well, again, that scene is written very specifically for him to act that way. So I'm going to go back to it again. It was just, this was the way it was written.
Well, it's poorly written then. It's a very poorly written film.
Yeah, and like I don't think that, because we're talking about the cast, right? I don't think that Cavill, if the scene was written Superman as Clark Kent confronts Bruce Wayne, I don't think that's on Cavill. Anyone else in that scene would have also had to have depicted that same.
It's the same level of emotion from him the whole movie. He just acts like a bully to me the whole movie. Charisma of a baked potato.
He's very like, I think he does kind of, there is a big depiction of just always being stoic. There's like stoicism and like just kind of this philosophy of it. I remember reading about how much that draws into this version of Superman. Like, it's not about, being the all-American for truth, justice, and the American way Superman. It's like a very stoic god.
I wrote down he's playing the role like Harrison Ford in Blade Runner.
Oh. Yeah, I see that.
Which is just, I don't know, not what I want from Superman.
But that's where I think the writing on this has a lot to do with why I feel like he was so polarizing in the role. And I think it's hard for modern writers to kind of get Superman right, because I feel like everybody kind of feels like they have to modernize everything. Nobody really wants to take that risk with having something that's a little bit maybe, I don't know, I guess outdated, right? Because there is a show, what's that show that recently came out? It was a CW show too, which caught me off guard. But I feel like the Superman and Lois show that came out recently, Anton, I don't know if you've seen that.
Oh yeah.
I saw the first episode of that show. This is a while back, and I haven't given the series more of a shot than this, but I do think that introduction scene to Superman, it's like a 3-minute thing. I think it's on YouTube too. That 3 minutes is the most perfect depiction of a live action Superman that I've ever seen. It captures the right vibe, the right tone. It sets up the world perfectly. And I want to see that in a big budget live action film, not with a CW budget, right? But I do think that's the difference between like taking a risk with like portraying Superman versus being like, hey, here's Superman, but here's Superman flavored to your liking instead of the Superman that was written on the ink of pages like 60, 70 years ago at this point.
Yeah, and I'll give this credit to Warner Brothers and DC Entertainment. They're not afraid to have multiple projects that will have varying degrees of writing, but will allow for those projects to be creative with how they want to depict their characters. And where I'm going with this is around, like you just touched on it, Ivan, like there's multiple CW projects that do support like multiple storylines, whether you're like Green Arrow, Flash, the greater DC universe as they kind of continue to build that out. We have the animated series for multiple properties, and not just like the animated series for Batman, but different adaptations and different writers across like, multiple movies or different shows. So I feel like there is like a support for better writing for these characters. It's just there's no centralized vision, or there wasn't a centralized vision.
Let's talk about the star of the show, Lex Luthor.
Ugh.
Played by Jesse Eisenberg.
So what's your guys' take? Is it just he was a big name, so like it fit at the time to have Jesse Eisenberg play Lex Luthor?
The explanation was that he fit the type of Lex Luthor that we saw in some iconic Superman story. Was it All-Star Superman? I don't remember. There was
Interesting.
Yeah, which I don't
kinda.
I don't remember Lex Luthor being this crazy. Like that.
That Lex Luthor cried.
Yeah. But to my earlier point, I keep stumbling on my words here, but like I do feel like I enjoyed Jesse Eisenberg's performance. I don't think he was the right fit for Lex Luthor. I don't think this was a great Lex Luthor, but I think had this performance been in another movie, I would have enjoyed him as a villain because I feel like it would work in some regard. I just enjoyed watching it. That being said, it didn't fit. If you were to tell me this is like, I don't know, some other unnamed DC character CEOs, which by the way, there's a lot of evil billionaires in the DC universe, which is kind of crazy, then I would buy it and I'd be like, all right, great. But not Lex Luthor himself. I don't know. I don't know what led them to cast him, but this was during his heyday, right? Technically.
It ended that's for sure.
I did not like him as Lex Luthor, personally.
Can I give you my theory on his portrayal of Lex Luthor?
Please.
He sucked.
Deep theory.
Yeah, look, it's a total miscast. First of all, I thought he was just too young for the role to begin with. I think Lex Luthor, I understand you can have different versions of the character, but he should have been someone older, like more like Ben Affleck's age.
Well, first off, Pat, being a comic book nerd, I know that Lex Luthor went to high school with Superman, or at least he did in Smallville. Never mind, I'm wrong.
He's still younger than Henry Cavill, though. It is a very to get in to provide a little more nuance than just he sucked. It does feel like he's acting in a different movie. His performance is completely at odds with the rest of the cast. I guess that's how he was directed to act the part, but he's neurotic and insufferable, and it's one of the worst examples of casting I can think of in a superhero film. Probably the other one is Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face in Batman Forever.
So this is my take. Jesse Eisenberg was having a lot of fun being a comic book character, but none of the performances in this film necessarily were trying to depict like a comic book movie, if that's fair.
They were very serious.
Yeah, they were trying to play it very straight, very serious, step into the characters, not think about being like a crazy man in a bat suit running around. It's more so just trying to play like a flawed character or that runs around in a bat suit. Now for Jesse Eisenberg, it was, I'm going to be a crazy Lex Luthor billionaire villain. And I think that's what we got.
I got a quote from Sonny Bunch of the Washington Post that I think sums up the performance well. Quote, as the film progresses, Lex degenerates into a gibbering madman, some strange mix of the Riddler and the Joker with a little bit of Mark Zuckerberg added for flair, end quote.
Is it my personal bias that I just really like Lex Luthor from the animated series?
Was that Clancy Brown?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, hello, Superman.
So one thing that I kind of took away, again, not to bring it up several times, but like the extended cut, guys, the extended cut. It's kind of like I think they directly said it that he's kind of going crazy because of the whole like messages from Darkseid that he's bumped into from all that tech.
Is that in the film?
Oh,
yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, because so at the end of the film, well, I don't think you got to that part, right? Because it's afterwards when they lock him up. Batman visits him in prison, and he starts spouting all this gibberish.
I read about it on Wikipedia.
Yeah, he starts spouting that someone's coming and that they've heard, his basically laying out that like Darkseid's coming. But in the extended cut, it's made a little bit more obvious that he's kind of losing it because he's been reading or something going into this tech that he has access to on the ship. But my problem with that even still is like there was no setup for like, hey, he was this Lex Luthor and then he turned to this Lex Luthor. He was this Lex Luthor the whole movie. And also the other thing that apparently, again, not something that necessarily is relevant because I don't think it really matters, but on that extended cut, this Lex Luthor is the son of the Lex Luthor that we would know from the comics. So this is Lex Luthor Jr., whereas Lex Luthor, who we would know from the comics, was his father. Again, irrelevant detail, but because if they were going to go that route, then show the OG Lex Luthor too, but there's weird, bizarre choices being made in this script.
Yeah, maybe it would have been a better actor.
It was just not very clear. So I have a question for you, Ivan. So being on set, also even just maybe from what your friends have or what from your colleagues have experienced working on set, what's the tone for people like with pressure from, I guess, the studio around, hey, we have to love Ben Affleck as Batman or we have to love Jesse Eisenberg as Luthor? Is there kind of that pressure being on set?
I think it depends on the set, right? Because I think for this film in particular, I think there was a lot of people that were having a great time. I don't think anybody was necessarily feeling the pressure. But I think a lot of it had to do with the way that Zack Snyder himself was like directing the set and having or coordinating everything. Because I'll be honest, there are certain sets where you kind of feel the pressure, but it all kind of stumbles down, just like any other job. But like it depends on who your boss is and how they manage the communication with the higher ups. Because if a lot of that starts leaking in, you can kind of tell and
feels a little toxic.
Yeah, and I feel like you could always tell on the screen if a movie was bad to work on because everything seems low effort. Especially the performances. But on this set, I don't think there was anything that necessarily kind of stood out. At least again, I was only there for like 3 weeks, but like the little bits that I got the chance to participate in.
That's fair.
Gossip wise, Hollywood wise, I feel like one thing that I have heard was that the set for Zack Snyder's Justice League was still the very positive environment that I had heard, but when it switched over to Joss Whedon, it became a whole different story.
It was, if I see anyone here with a Captain America shirt, you're getting shot.
Essentially. I think there was more pressure being felt, and I guess for one thing, at getting to that movie, not to get off topic, but like I do think Joss Whedon was put in there almost by force to kind of fix up a film that I don't think necessarily needed fixing. I think at that point, because you're so far into it, you should have let it play out the way it was playing out. And I do kind of sympathize with Zack Snyder over Justice League because he had just lost his daughter. So that's why he left the set for a bit. And for Warner Brothers to replace him during that time, I think was like super uncalled for, insensitive, and a bunch of other things. But projects are projects, but I do think that studios set the tone for a lot of this stuff. And whether a project comes out good or bad, if you don't have the right pieces in, you don't have the right level of support, of course you're going to come up with a project that doesn't necessarily deliver on any of the, I guess, audience expectation.
Makes sense. Wrapping up the cast, what do we think of Amy Adams as Lois Lane?
Love her. She's so great. 10 out of 10. I think that was one of the big miscasts of Man of Steel that obviously is going to bleed over into this film, but I never really bought her as Lois Lane.
Just no chemistry, right?
Tough role too. Like, I wrote down, because I was thinking about this just from a character standpoint. Reporters don't have that kind of power and influence in the modern world. And it's just, no one cares about reporters anymore.
Who's the best reporter depicted in movies?
I would have to go to All the President's Men, probably, right?
Vicky Vale.
No, it's a Kim Cattrall in Big Trouble in Little China.
Oh.
She's a reporter in that movie.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
that's how she even announces herself, like, I'm a reporter.
And even that's an example of something that couldn't work now. It's like Lois Lane, like, she has her own helicopter in this movie. I just think that part of it's tough, to say nothing of the chemistry point that you made.
The Daily Planet had its own helicopter tech.
Right, but she just gets it whenever she wants. And like, what's Lawrence Fishburne's like, okay, do whatever you want. Here's an unlimited budget. Go off to Africa.
No, she had a flight coach, Pat. She had a flight coach. They specifically told her not to fly anything but coach.
Tough role.
Honestly, I think it's tough in general, because I feel like Lois Lane kind of toes the line of like the in distress at times, or the very surly, sure of herself character that she is, I think, in the comics. But when it comes to live action, it's always been kind of topsy turvy with her. I'll be real. I don't think we've gotten a really good Lois Lane in live action until that Superman and Lois TV show. But besides that, you know, because I'm hoping Rachel Brosnan changes that in the James Gunn movie, because I do feel like she's a really, really strong actress.
Yeah, I like her.
And Amy Adams is too, but that's the thing. If you don't put a good script in front of her, then like any sort of Academy Award nominated actress or actor will fail in that regard.
Do you want to go first and give your rating?
Yeah. I think honestly, I feel like this movie is pretty down in the dumps for for me. I think this is probably the lowest I would mark any film. Again, I don't think it's like the worst thing in the world, but I think it comes pretty close. It's pretty disjointed. It feels kind of clumsy and not very well put together. But you know, there's elements of it that I like visually, but ultimately it just kind of fails to deliver on a lot of the hype that I thought was, you know, could have made a really good film.
So what would you give this from an A to F scale?
Oh, I'd probably give it like a D.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd give it an F, but honestly, I feel like it just needed a little bit more to get me to rate it an F.
I can go next. I have I have pretty high expectations when it comes to what I want from a comic book film, because I've seen great comic book films. And in general, I've seen great films. So there are very clear elements that we look for, whether it's good writing, good characterization, everything that we've talked about that make up good films is not in this film. And that's just how the dice rolled for a very big film. Like, big for the studio, big for the DCEU, a lot of high expectations for how this could set up success for the studio in competing with Marvel. And instead of focusing on a film, and instead of focusing on a good film and how to properly tell a story, I think that's what the team focused on here. It was just, how can we beat Marvel? And that showed in the film. Because there are elements of what could have been a good movie, could have been multiple good movies, but instead it was a bit of a rush job. It did feel very clunky, very messy, but there are elements that I really enjoyed, whether it's Ben Affleck as Batman. I do really like scenes that look like they were out of the comics because I'm a comic book fan, but there was not enough in this film for me to really rate this film high at all. And it was just a bit of a disappointment, and I really chalk this up to lack of care to create a good film and just too focused on the dollars of trying to create a large cinematic universe. It's an F for me. I don't feel bad saying that. I just don't think it's a very good movie.
I'll start off by saying that I'm not a fan of Zack Snyder's work for the most part. This is bad. It has its moments. You know, we touched on it. I'm echoing what you both said. I do like Ben Affleck as Batman. I like Jeremy Irons as Alfred. I like the limited screen time that Wonder Woman is given, played by Gal Gadot. Ivan, would you say it was like 9 minutes or less, something like that?
Yeah, just about.
Some of the action's well staged. The Hans Zimmer score is solid. I don't like anything else about it. The biggest problem with this, besides the casting of, I think, Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor and the portrayal of Superman by Henry Cavill, this film bit off more than it could chew. DC and Warner Brothers, they wanted to shortcut their own cinematic universe. They tried to do in one film what Marvel had earned across 5 or 6, and they picked the wrong horse. Zack Snyder, he's not the guy to do that. It was a disappointment then to a lot of audiences. I think viewing most of it now, it's worse. This is one of my all-time least favorite blockbusters of anything that we've covered on this podcast so far, Anton. It's oversized, it's ostentatious, it's ugly looking, it is a clunker of a movie. It's one of the most unpleasant viewing experiences I've ever had in the history of this podcast. Absolutely an F. My final point, DC should just stick to animation. I really like the animated films that they did in like the past 15 years. You know, Superman Doomsday, like Batman Under the Red Hood, I really liked. Batman Year One, there was Justice League Doom. The Dark Knight Returns animated movie that was a two-parter, I really enjoyed that. And that's to say nothing of the shows that they did in the 90s that we all liked. That's their bread and butter. I think that they should stick with that. And that's it for Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Ivan, great having you on. Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, guys. Despite my 2 technical difficulties.
It's okay. You're always welcome back, sir.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ivan. Love having you on. Loved every little behind-the-scenes nugget that you shared. Very, very, very welcome here.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Anton, next week is Pocahontas.
Oh, man. I just kind of felt like Batman as he heard Martha. Just like, what?
If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a follow and a 5-star review. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well. We have various levels of subscription there. As always, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter. For those who would like to support us directly, we have a Patreon. Links are in the description. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.